There's a reason that this book is the best one in the trilogy, and his name is Finnick Odair. And character development. I've been trying to reread the Hunger Games trilogy before the release of Sunrise on the Reaping next week. It's so exciting. This is probably even more of an anticipated release for me than like Onyx Storm was. I've read these many times before, but it's been a really long time since I've done a reread. And so I feel like when I was going through this, I was trying to go through with the lens of looking out specifically for Haymitch, since he's our mentor here and main character in the next book. And then also just kind of with an eye out for changes between the books and the movies, because I personally have seen the movies so many times that to me they sometimes don't always separate. Usually I can keep a good separation between the books and the movies because generally there are so many differences, but when you go into this one, I feel like Francis Lawrence read this book and took whatever I had pictured in my brain and put it directly onto the screen. That is how close it was to how I imagined this. So for me, it's really hard to separate the movie from this book, especially this one, just because I was truly so in love with how they did that movie. So we have lots of things to discuss, if you can see all the little tabs here. If you have not read Catching Fire, it is your time to exit and just know that these books are so good and you should definitely read them. So we start back in District 12 after the end of the Hunger Games. Things have gone back to normal for Katniss. She's now living in the Victor's Village with Peta and Haymitch, and her mother and sister are living in the Victor's Village with her. And even though they have plenty now, like Katniss thinks it's so weird that she goes hunting and she brings home game for Gale's family because Gale won't just outright accept money from Katniss. But for her, everything about her life before the Hunger Games was about feeding her family, and now she has more than enough. And so it's really weird for her to try and find something to do, especially while the entirety of District 12 seems to be going even further downhill, even though they get Parcel Day and they get all these extra special things because Katniss and Peta won the Hunger Games. There's still like a lot of need and a lot of shortages in their community. One of them is liquor, and she ends up picking some up on the way home from the Hob because she knows that last time they ran out completely, Haymitch went off the rails, to the point that she mentions that he was screaming at terrifying things only he could see. He scared Prim to death, and frankly, it wasn't much fun for me to see him like that either. Like, we've known from the beginning that drinking has been sort of a coping mechanism for Haymitch, but seeing, I guess, the confirmation that drowning out his sorrows is kind of what keeps the very extreme PTSD away from him. I'm wondering if in his book we're kind of going to see not necessarily like a villain origin story. Obviously, Haymitch is one of our heroes in the trilogy, but when we leave him, depending on what age he is when the book ends, I feel like we could sort of be seeing this downfall as he loses more and more tributes over the years, because until he gets to Katniss and Peta, he hasn't had any tributes win. I also forgot about some of the side characters. We don't really see them in District 12. I'm sure like if we were to watch the movie again and look for them, we would see characters or like representations of them. Like obviously we don't talk to Greasy Say in the movies, but we do see her, at least in the Hob, when she kind of like briefly exchanges the Mockingjay pin with Katniss, even though that's not how she got it in the books. But she's at the Hob and one of the peacekeepers named Darius comes up and is kind of like joking with her. She's about to go back to the capital and he's like, shouldn't you look better? And there's just kind of like a good camaraderie between all of District 12, and obviously there's some, peacekeepers in their community that they don't like or that might be more rigid with the rules, but Katniss has pointed out to us a number of times that the peacekeepers generally get along with the people and are much more lax than they would be in other districts, especially when she was talking to Rue in the first book and she realizes how lenient her own peacekeepers are compared to those in 11. I kind of hated that they made Gale her cousin. Like, it makes sense. The Capitol would have lost their minds if they knew Katniss had another love interest, but part of me is like, wouldn't they have lost their minds in the best way if they knew that Katniss was falling in love with someone on screen and that she had a kind of boyfriend back home? I forgot how creepy the meeting was with President Snow when he shows up to her house. So, in the movie, this is a really intense moment. They did a great job with this scene. But when I was rereading it back, first of all, I forgot about a lot of the little physical descriptions that they talk about with Snow, like how his lips are overly pouty because he's had injections and stuff, because he is part of the Capitol, and we don't see that in the movies. So some of those little things I forgot about. And then also, it's already menacing enough the way that they have the script, but when I read this back, I was like, this is wild. So they're talking about how Katniss needs to pretend to be in love with Peta again because a lot of the people in the districts think that their berry thing was an act of rebellion, not of desperation to stay together. So Katniss is like, why don't you just kill me now? Arrange an accident. Wild thing to say out loud to a person who has the power to do that to you, but he even says who would buy it, not you, if you were watching, which is fair. And we see this in A Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, but we also see it throughout the course of the trilogy. He is super strategic and conniving, but now Katniss knows, like, when we go on this victory tour, I've just told Peta that I'm not in love with him, and now he needs to act super in love with Katniss to fool everyone, and then also to save her non-boyfriend Gale. Because that's sort of who seems to be on the chopping block if this doesn't work. And I did love the note about Haymitch. She goes to his house and pours ice water on him, and she says, my mentor in the games, it was his duty to keep me alive. I only hope he's still up for the job. Which he definitely is. Haymitch definitely has his own plethora of issues to work through, but he does have such a soft spot for Katniss and Peta, which is, it's so sweet. I love his character. Also, we get like a small note. We kind of talk about this later in the book, but the way Haymitch won his games was to use the force field, which is, it's not as bad as Katniss using the berries, but it was enough that Haymitch probably exited the arena to a very similar situation that Katniss came into, where, you know, Snow is not happy with her, the game makers are not happy with her, and I'm wondering, like, who Haymitch's mentor is, since there wouldn't have really been anybody around for him. Like, how does he end up finding that out and navigating, which will be interesting. But Katniss notes that, you know, they're about to head into the third Quarter Quell. The last winner of the Quarter Quell was Haymitch, and she said that the teachers in her schools didn't go into much detail about it, which is surprising because that was the year that Haymitch won. And so I'm wondering, like, it seems that they didn't air his games as often as other people because of how he won. Like, they don't want people to see that the Capitol's own creations can be used against them like that. But I do think Haymitch is going to have a very similar experience to Katniss, where, you know, Katniss is pretty stoic. I feel like Haymitch is going to be a little more, not arrogant necessarily, but come out of it being like, look at what I did. And then somebody's going to have to drop the news on him, like, Capitol's not happy with you. And they do kill his family and his girlfriend while he's in the area or after. I don't know if we know that for sure yet. But that's probably in retaliation of what he did. But I think it's just important to note that they never air the 50th Hunger Games, because for them, that is like their championship game. There's double the tributes. So it's odd that it's not really talked about that much. I love that Katniss is supposed to be developing a talent. It's not that she doesn't have talents. It's just that they're hunting and survival and stuff that, like, first of all, hunting is illegal. If they film her doing that, that's treason. And anything else is not going to be really exciting enough, I guess. And so this is one of my favorite things. My mother tried to interest me in a variety of suitable alternatives from a list Effie Trinket sent to her. Cooking, flower arranging, playing the flute. None of them took, although Prim had a knack for all three. I thought that was such a cute little side note. Luckily, Cinna is covering for her, and he's doing all the work in this group project because Katniss is now taking up an interest in fashion design, even though she's never seen a single thing that she has supposedly drawn. And so Cinna comes in with all these designs, and she says, you know, I think I show a lot of promise. When we're on the train to the victory tour, Haymitch sort of drops the information on Katniss that she's expected to marry Peta at some point. And when they come back, like, I always thought it was, I don't know if it's a sweet line, but I did think it shows how much Haymitch thinks of Peta when he tells Katniss, like, you could do a lot worse. But this time, rereading it, trying to think more about, like, what his book is going to be like, he says that, Haymitch gives my shoulder a pat and says, you could do a lot worse. You know, he heads off to his compartment, taking the smell of wine with him. Which, if they kill off Haymitch's girlfriend, that's why I just want to know. I want to know how much time we're getting in the next book. Like, in Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, we make a significant, like, time jump between the beginning and the end of the movie. There's a lot of time that passes, whereas, like, in these, you know, there's a couple months maximum. And it's just making me wonder, like, what situation Haymitch was maybe forced into after his games and after his girlfriend was killed. Like, him saying you could do a lot worse, does that sort of imply things that maybe he went through where the Capitol was trying to push him into a relationship or something like that? Because we get a mention, like, the reason people haven't been trying to, like, constantly take Katniss out on dates and stuff like that from people from the Capitol was because of Peta. They don't want to cross that line because they're, you know, the famous couple. And so for Haymitch, like, what does that look like? And for him, what did, like, a lot worse look like? Because we know how much he's going to hate the Capitol from the very beginning. So what does that look like if he's getting pushed into relationships or showing up to these events where people are going to be constantly trying to bid for his attention? And because of that, he chooses to be single instead. Not that I think in his current state he was necessarily up for dating anybody, but he's rich, which doesn't mean nothing in District 12. So I'm interested in a little bit more on that end of things too. That was my next tab. I think of Haymitch, unmarried, no family, blotting out the world with drink. He could have had his choice of any woman in the district, and he chose solitude. And she kind of goes on and says, like, solitude isn't the right word, because for him it's more like if he'd gone on to have a family, like the kids still go in the reaping even if the parent is a victor. And she even notes, like, it happens too often for it to not be coincidence. Like, people want to see the kids of victors that they love go into the arena, which is beyond sick, but I would see how they would rig it like that. We finally clear the air with Peta, which obviously, like, we know that they're gonna fall in love, but Peta, I feel like he needed to cool off for a bit after figuring out that he wasn't pretending and Katniss was. Like, that's brutal. And he says, I knew you had something with Gale. I was jealous of him before I even officially met you, and it wasn't fair to hold you to anything that happened in the games. And this is sort of when they decide that they're gonna be friends again, which immediately after, Katniss notes how many times she wants to ask him for comfort and stuff like that. I'm like, let's connect the pieces here, honey. I forgot, like, obviously Peta's talent is going to be art, but I forgot that he had painted the games as his talent. He painted some creepy stuff, by the way. Like, it wasn't just like the cornucopia or like scenes from nature where they were in the arena. He has Glimmer as a mutt. He painted a picture of Katniss lying unconscious in blood. I don't understand the thought process here, Peta. But for Peta, that's sort of his way of dealing with the nightmares, because Katniss says she hates these paintings because that's what she sees every single day in her nightmares. And Peta, it seems like that is his way of getting them out of his nightmares, or at least attempting to. So it's understandable, but it is disturbing. I did like, though, when Peta kind of finally snaps on Katniss and Haymitch, because I love the connection between Katniss and Haymitch and how they are able to communicate so easily, and they have really a depth of understanding of one another because they are very similar people. But Peta, he like gets so upset and says, this little thing where you two tell each other everything and keep me out of it, like, this has to stop. I'm not stupid or weak, like, I can handle it. And Katniss realizes, like, she doesn't think that Peta is stupid or weak necessarily, but she does think he's a little naive, I think. She doesn't say that out loud. But it's also in part because they knew they didn't need to worry about Peta and how he comes off to the crowd, whereas they really need to calculate what Katniss is going to be doing. But then Peta he gets very upset, understandably, because he's like, hey Mitch, like, I get it. I'm not the favorite. You chose Katniss. And we get, like, the full confirmation. Katniss says, did you choose me? And he said, yes. And then she says, why? You like him better. And Haymitch tells her, like, yes. He likes Peta better, but he said for the longest time of the games, like, I could only get one person home. And Peta was so intent on protecting you that, you know, if he had put his full force behind that cause, it was way more likely that he could at least get one of them home, and that person would have been Katniss. So that makes sense, but also I do feel Peta on him being like, I don't want to be left out of the plans anymore. This is getting ridiculous. So I'm glad they're bringing him in. And they just gave away their year's worth of food, and then the people sort of like salute to Peta and Katniss, and then they get dragged away and somebody gets killed because of it, because it's seen as rebellion. So we run away and we hide, and we had that conversation where Peta's like, you need to tell me your plans. And then after that, because they did disappear and Haymitch was able to take them somewhere where there weren't going to be cameras, then the guards are like all over them after that. And Effie is so annoyed because she wanted to go look around the Justice Building, and it's so funny. I'm something of an expert in architectural design, you know. There's just like this long pause, and Portia's like, oh yes, I've heard that. I always think it's so funny when we try to like pander to Effie. I love when we're talking to Caesar Flickerman and he's like joking with her because at the I guess at the end of the last book or something, Katniss's mom said something about her being too young to have a boyfriend, and now they're talking about throwing them a wedding in the Capitol, and Caesar's like, before we set a date, we better clear it with Katniss's mother, which obviously the audience thinks is hilarious. President Snow is there, by the way, and Katniss is like, you'll have to pass a new law, and then the president says, if that's what it takes, and he's like acting in good humor, and then Katniss, the aside, she's like, oh, the fun we two have together. I love how, like, there's so many moments of sarcasm in her thoughts that we don't necessarily hear out loud in the movie, and so I liked getting those again in the book. I completely forgot that, in the first book, I don't know if they showed this in the movie, but in the first book, when Katniss does the arrow through the apple and the pig to get the game maker's attention, somebody stumbles backwards into a punch bowl, and that person is Plutarch Heavensbee, the now game maker, since Seneca Crane has been executed for allowing both Katniss and Peta to live. One thing that I understand why it was cut completely from the movies, like, it's so much a side tangent for us to get to know Madge better, but I really did like watching her and Katniss be friends in this book, because in the movies, Katniss's only real friends are Peta and Gale and Haymitch. She has Prim, but it's less of a friendship and more of a parent relationship for Katniss, I think. And so I really liked seeing Katniss be able to have that female friendship, because she doesn't fully have something like that with Effie, at least not yet. She even takes Madge out into the woods. She's like, I can tell that she's been dying to go. This is also when Katniss realizes it doesn't matter how high up you are in District 12, like, you're still nowhere near the capital, because Madge's mother gets these really bad migraines, it sounds like, and Katniss is like, why don't you just go to the capital and get it fixed? But Madge says, you don't go to the capital unless you're invited, even though she's, the daughter of their governor. They don't have any type of power to do that. This is something I probably ignored the first time around reading this book. So this is after the whipping. Gale has been whipped. We brought him back to Katniss's house to have her mom treat him. And Katniss asks if she can save him. And Haymitch says, don't worry, used to be a lot of whippings before Cray. She's the one we took them to. I feel like there's a really good chance now that we're going to see Katniss's mom really early on in the book, because Haymitch grew up right near them, and if this was like a regular interaction, we might get to see a little bit of that. And Katniss's mom and Maisley were close friends, so we'll kind of see hopefully a little bit of her life beforehand too, just to kind of get a vibe of District 12, 20 years ago. Also, Haymitch is telling Katniss's mom exactly what happened with Gale and the whipping and stuff like that, and then she says, so it's starting again like before. And then Haymitch says, by the looks of it, because they've just replaced Cray, who was a very lenient peacekeeper, with someone who's way more intense. And so I'm wondering what this means, because as far as we know, there have not been uprisings between the Dark Days and now. So by that, does she mean like regular whippings and like a harsher environment in District 12, or does she mean uprising? I feel like there's not enough information here, because Katniss says, I don't know exactly what my mother means by things starting again, but I'm too angry and hurting to ask, because she'd also been taking the whip to the face, which it was not nearly as bad in the movie. Like, she got a mild scratch. This took, like, I think they pushed months out for her bridal photo shoot because she had such a bad cut in her face. I also really liked, I talked about this a little bit, I think, in my recap for the Hunger Games, is that in these books, Suzanne Collins is really able to pack a lot of character depth into these teeny tiny books. And I think something that's really important is for Katniss to not even fully understand her own motivations. She's talking about the berries, and she's like, I actually don't know why I did that. Was it because she couldn't handle coming back to District 12 alone? Because Peta was going to let her come back. It wasn't going to be a fight to the death between the two of them. And she's like, did I hold them out because I knew I'd be shunned if I came back without him? And if that's the only reason I did it, then I'm despicable. If I held them out because I loved him, then I'm self-centered but forgivable. But if I held them out to defy the capital, I am someone of worth. The trouble is I don't exactly know what was going on inside me at that moment, which is fair because she was panicking. She'd just been up all night listening to Cato get ripped to shreds. It wasn't like she was going to be 100% in charge of her thoughts at that time. I think it's a mix of the three, which is what I like about her character. Like, she's not just going to have one motivation. She has multiple different reasons for having wanted to do that. I think she does say, or at least she says it in the movie, they don't need to have a victor then, like if they're gonna make this rule change and reverse on us and stuff like that. And so I think her primary motivation was just like anger, but overall, I think it's fair to say that she had all three of those when she was in the arena. Katniss tells Haymitch that she wants to start an uprising. Haymitch laughs at her, and he's like, well, I want to drink. You let me know how that works out for you, though. Oh, that's so funny. And then Katniss is like, so that's your plan. Like, your plan is to just drink. And he's like, my plan is to make sure everything is just perfect for your wedding. And then they're talking about Effie. And he says, do you know she asked me if I'd like to give you away? I told her the sooner the better. It's so funny. Like, I love that. And I do love the relationship. She says, Haymitch, I can hear the pleading creeping into my voice. Katniss, he mimics my tone. It won't work. And that's why I'm wondering if, when Katniss's mom was talking about things starting again, did they attempt some sort of uprising? Because Haymitch is so entirely sure that this won't work. Something that was definitely not in the movie that I do feel is important, but I do understand why they cut it. So we meet Bonnie and Twill in the forest of District 12, and they have been fleeing from 8, I think. They have that cracker with like I guess it's burned into it, like the Mockingjay, because it's like their symbol of rebellion now. And this is when we find out that the Capitol has been using the same footage of District 13 since, like, as long as anybody can remember. So we have this footage of, like, the smoldering District 13, and that's what the Capitol wants you to think of, because they bombed District 13, and they want people to think that it's just completely obliterated, and there's no reason to go back there. But they tell Katniss, like, if you really pay attention, up in the corner, you'll see a Mockingjay's wing, and you'll see it every single time they show District 13, because they're just reusing the footage, so who knows what's there now. And I think it's a fair assessment of Katniss to be like, that sounds like someone who is desperate. And they are, which, like, to be fair, they're definitely desperate for District 13 to be a place for them to flee and to actually have people there. But Katniss does at least try to help them. Like, she spends the day with them, teaching them how to find food in the forest and stuff. And because she does that, when she comes back to District 12, she finds that the fence, for the first time, like, ever, has electricity going through it. And she says that this has happened to her and Gale before, where, you know, the electricity is on, but it usually only lasts a couple hours and they can just wait it out. But this time just seems a little different, because Thread, their new peacekeeper, has also had all of her little, like, places where she dug under, or where they could, like, kind of sneak under the fence. Those have all been patched up. So her only option is to climb a tree, come across a branch that's over the fence, and drop at least 20 feet. And so she injures herself, tailbone and her heel. And when she gets home, she finds that the peacekeepers are waiting for her, which is very much confirmation that they saw her leave District 12 and they tried to trap her out so that they could catch her. And I feel like, you know, Peta's our best actor, but Katniss really pulls it off in this scene where she's like, sorry, I've been gone all day. Where haven't I been? And then she goes off on this whole ramble of where she's gone to and who she saw that day and stuff. And then, like, everybody else immediately catches on. They know where Katniss was. And so Prim, like, ends up joking with her about where she told Katniss the goat man lived, and she ended up going to the wrong entrance and stuff like that. And so, like, they all kind of, like, laugh at her. And it's so cute because, like, the peacekeepers are like, what's in the bag? Because they think it's going to be dead animals and plants from the forest. And Katniss brings out, you know, bandages and candy and stuff like that. And then Peta comes over and he takes some of the peppermints and eats one. And then Katniss is like, they're mine. But he tosses the bag to Haymitch, who takes some before passing it to Prim. And I just thought it was so cute. It was like, there's so few fun moments between, like, our whole entire crew. Usually it's just always constant doom and gloom. So it's nice to see them all, like, joking around at one time. But now that Katniss is stuck in bed, she spends a lot of time watching TV. And so she ends up seeing the District 13 footage that Bonnie and Twill were talking about. And she can definitely see the Mockingjay wing going over the exact same place every single time as the footage loops. And so she notices that there's someone who says they're in front of the Justice Building in 13, but it has to be a green screen because it's the exact same footage. And so I think Katniss still thinks, like, this is kind of delusional, but if this is old footage of District 13, what does it look like now? Even if it's just not smoldering anymore, like, we have had no updated footage for at least as long as Katniss has been alive. Oh no, way longer. It's actually, I feel like, so sad. Katniss is trying on all those wedding dresses and stuff, and both Prim and her mom are super excited about it, and it takes her a minute to figure it out, but she's like, oh, they're so happy about this because they think it means that I'm safe. Like, the Capitol would not spend all this money on someone that they plan on killing, especially because she stepped in at the whipping. Her entire family has been worried about her since then. So Katniss is like, right, because I think she sees through it, because Snow would 100% do that for the entertainment of the Capitol and then still kill her if he could, but, you know. And then we're watching TV and we see Katniss's dresses. They made a whole TV special about it, which is wild. Can you imagine? Like, somebody made a TV special about you and they didn't tell you when it was coming on. What a blindside moment. But Prim had heard rumors that that was what was going to be on tonight. And then when they get to the end and Katniss's mom says, you know, they're talking about the Quarter Quell, and her mom says it must be the reading of the card because it's the only thing that would make sense timing wise. And this is when Katniss's mom said, I had a friend who went that year, meaning the 50th. Maisie Donner, her parents owned the sweet shop. They gave me her songbird after a canary. And Prim and Katniss give, like, the sibling look because it's the first time her mother has ever mentioned this girl. And then they announce the 75th, and that it's going to be from the existing pool of victors, with the idea that even the strongest in the districts cannot defeat the capital, which makes Katniss think, I feel like that card has not been in there that long, and that whatever was supposed to happen has been replaced by this. Now, this whole time, almost the entirety of the book so far, Katniss has been trying to convince everyone in her life that they should take off for the woods and live out there. And it's really hard to figure that out because Gale's like, why is Peta coming? And Haymitch is like, that's not going to work. Peta knows that Katniss is never going to leave. Obviously, once this is announced, we can't leave. They're going to catch them. They'll kill them, whatever it is. But Peta, I love Coach Peta. He puts Katniss and Haymitch through like intense training because they don't know. They know obviously Katniss is going back into the arena, and then Haymitch or Peta is going to go back to the arena. So they're doing this really intense physical training, and over time Katniss realizes, like, I've been thinking so much about who my competitors are that I haven't paid as much attention to who my teammates are. This is also sort of when Katniss makes the connection between how Haymitch won and how they won. And she says about the force field, they never planned on anyone using it as a weapon. It made them look stupid that he had figured it out. I bet they had a good time trying to spin that one. Bet that's why I don't remember seeing it on television. It's almost as bad as Us and the Berries. And she starts laughing about it. Haymitch thinks it's funny, and that's when Katniss starts to feel a little more confident heading into the games. Like, obviously she doesn't want to be going in, but she says, I think I finally know who Haymitch is. I'm beginning to know who I am, and surely two people who have caused the capital so much trouble can think of a way to get Peta home alive, because that's Katniss's stipulation. She has told Haymitch clearly, if Peta gets chosen, Haymitch can volunteer. But if Haymitch gets chosen, Peta's 1000% going to volunteer and go into the arena to try and protect Katniss. And so with a 50-50 chance that Peta's going back in, Katniss has made Haymitch promise to either step in for Peta if his name gets called. Because once someone volunteers, I guess you can't be like, no, I want my spot. So Haymitch has said he'll go in and volunteer for Peta, or that he will try to get Peta home alive instead of Katniss. She's like, it's his turn to get picked. I loved seeing Joanna. So like, obviously the elevator scene is iconic and hilarious. But I love that she was talking to Katniss, and she actually is, I feel like Joanna gives very much like tomboy vibes in the movie, but she's kind of more girly in the book. And she's saying that she wished she'd gotten Cinna. She's like, you look fantastic. And then she talks about Katniss's past outfits and is saying that strapless number you wore in District 2, the deep blue one with the diamonds, so gorgeous, I wanted to reach through the screen and tear it off your back. So like, still threatening, but I like that they have like a couple little moments where Joanna's like fun and not extremely scary. They show up to the training center, and the new Avox is Darius, who at the beginning of the book was joking around with Katniss, being like, you should look better before going to the Capitol. He is buying stuff in the Hob, even though he's a peacekeeper. And then he also stood up for Gale when Thread was whipping him. So that was enough treason to get him turned into an Avox. And now he has to care for Katniss and Peta, which is weird. I like the training sessions with the other tributes in this book, because like we get to know them a little bit better. I thought it was just like kind of super cute that they break for lunch and they scoot all their tables together because they're all friends, which sucks going into the Hunger Games. And they talk about their private sessions where they have to show off their skill to the game makers. And obviously, like, there's such an age discrepancy between all of the different tributes. There's a lot of kidding about it at lunch, what we might do. Sing, dance, strip, tell jokes. Mags, who I can understand a little better now, decides she's just going to take a nap. I love Mags, and I feel like I noticed her a lot more in this reread, just like between her bravery of going into the arena again instead of Annie, and then like the way she just kind of walks into the fog when it's time for her to die, essentially. I feel like probably my first reread I just didn't notice it that much, but I had a lot of respect for Mags in this reread. Also, Suzanne Collins, if you want to write one more book, I think, or two, I think it would be really interesting to see Finnick's games, or I think it'd be really sad, but to see Annie's games, because that would be really interesting. Mags was the mentor for Finnick. So when you have multiple mentors, I assume you get multiple mentors all at once. Like if you're in District 1, do you have like 50 mentors? Or is it just who won the most recently? Because that would probably mean that Finnick was Annie's mentor. That feels like almost a forbidden love story, I guess. Finnick would have been a mentor at 15. And does that entire burden get placed on him? Or did he have Mags, his own mentor, to help mentor Annie? I feel like there's a really sweet found family dynamic that we could explore there. I'm not holding out for any more books from Suzanne Collins in the Hunger Games, honestly, but I am so not against it if she wants more. Ugh. So we know, like, when they go in to show their skills, this time, Peta paints Rue, and then Katniss hangs a dummy and says that it's Seneca Crane. And those are obviously both very, from the game maker's perspective, very disrespectful things. And so when they get their scores back, Katniss is like, we're getting zeros. And instead they get 12s, which, if we remember from the last book, getting an 11 put a target on Katniss's back. And so this time getting a 12, both of them getting a 12, it's like, they cannot be ignored. It's expected for people to go after them for that because, like, they're seen as such a threat by the game makers. Haymitch is upset about this, and he even says, he's like, go to bed, I can't stand to look at either one of you. It's so sad that he's mad about it. I understand why. Like, Haymitch is trying his absolute best to keep these kids alive, and they are constantly self-sacrificing and making that a difficult job for him. So I do feel bad for him. I love the scene. They have this, like, extra day where they have a picnic on the roof, and it's so cute. Peta says he wishes he could freeze this moment and live in it forever, and Katniss is like, usually him saying stuff like that indicates his undying love makes me just feel really guilty, but she's so happy in that moment that she says, okay, I can hear the smile in his voice, then you'll allow it? I'll allow it. And it's so cute. Why didn't we get this scene? The movies could have been as long as they wanted to be, and I would have been there for every second. They could have included stuff like this if it weren't for the baby. What an iconic moment. Everybody knows what you're talking about when you say that line. So we've had all of the people come talk on the stage, and all the tributes are very angry that they're going back into the arena. We're basically trying to stop the games at this point, and Peta comes up with the rear being like, if it weren't for the baby, because he tells everybody that they're already married, they did the toasting ceremony, and that Katniss is pregnant. And then, from Katniss's perspective, there, he's done it again. Oh, it's so funny. It's such an intense but, like, great moment. And honestly, there was not a single thing that Peta could have said that would have given them a better chance at not going into the arena. Because that's what causes the Capitol people to actually want to stop the games, which is something they would never really want. Again, I do love Katniss and Haymitch's ability to sort of, like, telepathically talk. The spile shows up, and Katniss at first doesn't know what it is. And she's like, I can hear Haymitch growling at me. Use your brain if you have one. What is it? And then she finally figures out that it's for water. Most of the games is spot on, like exactly what happened in the movie. They did such an impressive job with this part, in my opinion. I know there's some people who have their, like, qualms with this movie, but to me, this was perfect, and specifically how they did the games. The dialogue is word for word exactly what happens. It's just, like, played out so precisely. I feel like I don't have that many tabs in this section. The one thing, when the Morphling runs out of, she was hiding, and takes the monkey on so that Peta doesn't die, it was already upsetting in the movie, but this one, I don't think they actually did show this in the scene, but it's so sad, because Katniss is like, do I sing to her? Like, what do I do? Like, Rue liked music, but what should I do for this person I barely know? And then Peta is just so sweet. He's, like, describing colors and stuff to her, which they know the Morphling likes because she likes to paint. And then the Morphling's, like, trying to paint on Peta. She lifts up a trembling hand and paints what I think might be a flower on Peta's cheek. Thank you, he whispers. That looks beautiful. And it's just, that is such a tender moment. Like, the whole lead up to it. This whole scene is just, it shows Peta's character so well in, like, such a short amount of time. Because he does have a little more sass and edge in the books than he does in the movie, but at his very core, like, that's who he is. Just, like, a super kind person. And that scene made me very sad. Okay, now that I said that they did the games perfectly, and then they cut out this scene, they had to put that medicine on them after the fog burns, which we had cut out that whole thing, because, like, it's not, like, it's super consequential to the rest of the games, the way that, like, everything else is, but they put it on, it looks horrible. Candace is like, poor Finnick, is this the first time in your life you haven't looked pretty? And Finnick says, it must be, the sensation's completely new. How have you managed it all these years? It's so funny. And then Finnick wants to play a joke on Peta. He's like, let's put our faces right in front of him when we wake him up to scare him. And they do it, and it's so funny. I forgot that Joanna actually does slap Katniss in the face when they come out of the bleeding rain. And Joanna, I feel like, is understandably annoyed with Wyrus. I'm not saying that she should be. I'm just saying if I were in Joanna's position and I was taking care of Beetee and Wyrus the way that she was, that would be very frustrating. I don't think it's right that she tried to shove Wyrus down, but Katniss snaps and is like, lay off her. And then Joanna is pissed, and she steps forward before I can react and slaps me so hard I see stars. Who do you think got them out of that bleeding jungle for you? And then before Joanna can say anything incriminating, Finnick picks her up and goes in. It's like, we just see them like in the background, Finnick just dunking her in the water. It's so funny. And the whole time Joanna's like screaming insults at Katniss. It's so funny. I do love that scene. I know, like, to them it wouldn't be funny, but from our perspective reading, like, that's kind of hilarious. Katniss kind of finally draws the conclusion that all of the tributes are trying to protect Peta, and she doesn't know why. She's like, I know why I am protecting Peta, but she doesn't understand other people who, like, they've just met him. But she does make a note that, like, you know, the Morphling came out from the tree and tried to protect him. Finnick literally CPR'd him back to life, which never, like, Peta's heart stopped. They were this close to a cannon, so why on earth would he physically revive him when saving Peta would mean, like, him dying? And so she's having a really hard time understanding this, and then she's like, Joanna brings these people out for me, like, what does that mean? And then she says, what has Haymitch possibly said to them? What has he bargained with to make them put Peta's life above their own? Which is a fair question at this point. Obviously, the rebellion, they know that if Peta dies, Katniss is gonna lose it, or she's just not gonna care anymore. That's why we know later on why they did it, but I think that was definitely a fair question for her at that point, because she's so confused. I love that. So earlier, Katniss had, before Peta ran into the force field and almost died, Katniss was able to see it at the last split second because Beetee taught her how to do it, but she didn't want other people to know that, and so she said she could hear it with her supersonic hearing from the ear that the Capitol fixed, which I thought was funny, both because, like, what an answer, and then also, like, it's trying to poke at the Capitol of being like, see, you didn't intend to do this. She's like, yeah, I can hear butterfly wings. Like, it finally catches up to her because Finnick is like, Katniss can hear the force field, let's have her go first. And Beaty's like, hear it. Because he knows that she can't hear it. But, you know, he goes along with it, which was funny. I don't really have anything through to the end, just because it was so exactly in the movie. But obviously, we get to the end. Joanna cuts the tracker out of Katniss's arm. Even though we think that Joanna's attacking us, we get scooped up. We find out that everyone has been in on the rebellion except for us. And that Peta is in the Capitol. And Gale's there, which I think Haymitch realized would be the only thing to keep Katniss from going completely feral, would be to have Gale there. But Gale tells her that there's no more District 12. So that's where we land. That moment in the movies, though, it's so good. Like, normally, I don't know, I feel like I'm not one of those people who can be like, the acting in that movie was so good. Like, I can tell when acting is bad, but I am not necessarily like a film critic. But that moment, they knew that Jennifer Lawrence could pull it off. And they put that camera right in her face so that when Gale says there is no District 12, we can see her going from just like complete shock to like devastation to anger. And the way she works through it, like, it was such a good moment. And then they cut off and they play Yellow Flicker Beat by Lorde. It's so good. I'm excited to get into Mockingjay and just get a full recap done before next week. I would love to hear your thoughts if any of these moments you didn't remember either, because you, like me, have seen the movie a billion times, but it's been a while since the last reread. Or if there are other parts in the book that you feel like people forget a lot, I would love to hear that, as well as just any general excitement and or theories about Sunrise on the Reaping. I'm so excited for the book. I will be doing a full review of that along with the Mockingjay video, which will probably be in a couple days. Please like this video if you liked it. Click subscribe if you want to talk about more book stuff and Sunrise on the Reaping. My name is Caitlin. Thanks for watching. Bye.